There are people in this world who survive not because they are strong, but because they have learned to carry weight without making a sound. Amora was one of them. She had been carrying it for so long that she no longer remembered what it felt like to stand upright without the burden pressing into her spine. The debt, the silence, the shame, it all lived inside her like a second heartbeat, steady, relentless, and impossible to ignore. She worked 3 jobs, not because she wanted to, but because the alternative was unthinkable. There was a small apartment on the edge of the city where her mother slept in the only bedroom, where the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's television through the plaster, where the rent was always 2 weeks late and the landlord's patience had worn to nothing. Amora paid it, every month, without fail, even when it meant skipping meals, even when it meant walking home in the rain because the bus fare could buy her mother's medication instead. Her mother didn't know. She couldn't. The cancer had taken so much already, her strength, her memory, her ability to recognize her own daughter some days. Amora would sit beside her bed and hold her hand, and her mother would smile at her like she was a stranger offering kindness. And Amora would smile back. Because what else could she do? The diner where she worked nights was the kind of place where people came to forget. The lighting was too dim. The coffee was too weak. The booths were cracked leather that had seen too many lonely hours, too many whispered confessions, too many people who had nowhere else to go. Amora fit right in. She worked the late shift, midnight to dawn, the hours when the world felt like it had stopped spinning, when time became something thick and slow, when every sound, the clatter of a fork, the hiss of the coffee machine, the low murmur of voices, seemed louder than it should. She didn't mind it. The silence, the stillness. It was easier than the daylight, where people looked at you and expected you to have answers. Hey, no one expected anything. She poured coffee. She wiped down tables. She existed in the margins, and that was enough. Before we go on, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. It was a Thursday when everything changed. Or maybe it was a Friday. The days had started to blur together, one indistinguishable from the next. She was sitting in the back corner of the diner during her break, eating a plate of cold fries that someone had left behind. She didn't waste food. She couldn't afford to. The diner was nearly empty. A man at the counter nursing his 3rd cup of coffee. A woman in the booth by the window staring at her phone like it held the answers to every question she'd ever asked. And Amora, alone in her corner, chewing slowly, tasting nothing. She didn't hear him approach. One moment, she was alone. The next, there was a presence behind her, heavy, deliberate, impossible to ignore. The air around her shifted. The temperature dropped. Her spine straightened instinctively, her body responding to something her mind hadn't yet processed. And then he spoke. His voice was low, quiet, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to command attention. It wrapped around her like smoke, curling into the spaces between her thoughts, settling into her bones. You're with me now. 4 words. That was all it took. Amora turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know what she expected to see. But it wasn't him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who took up space not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't help it. His suit was dark, tailored, expensive, the kind that didn't belong in a place like this. His hands were in his pockets, his posture relaxed, but there was something in the way he stood that made her think of a predator at rest. Patient, Satan. His face was sharp, all clean lines and shadow. Dark hair swept back from his forehead. Eyes that were almost black, so deep she couldn't see the bottom. He looked at her the way people look at things they've already decided belong to them. Amora's mouth opened. No sound came out. He didn't wait for her to respond. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, crisp and worn at the edges. He placed it on the table in front of her. It landed with a soft thud, heavier than it should have been. Your debt, he said. It's been paid. She stayed at the wallet, then at him, then back at the wallet. I don't understand. You will. He turned and walked toward the door. His steps were measured, unhurried. He moved like someone who had never been told no in his life, like someone who had never needed to ask twice. Amora sat frozen, her hands trembling against the table. The wallet was still there. Real. Solid. She opened it with shaking fingers and saw the contents. Cash. Too much of it. Bills stacked neatly. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. Her throat tightened. Her vision blurred. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. By the time she looked up again, he was gone. But the weight she'd been carrying for so long, the debt, the shame, the fear, it had shifted, and in its place, something else had taken root. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that felt like gravity pulling her toward a man whose name she didn't even know. His name was Dante. She learned it 2 days later, when he appeared at the diner again. This time, he didn't sit in the shadows. He didn't linger by the door. He walked straight to her station, pulled out a chair at the counter, and ordered black coffee. No sugar, no milk, just darkness in a cup. Amora's hands shook as she poured it. He didn't look at her the way most men did. There was no hunger in his gaze, no want, no expectation. He looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they've already solved. Like she was a fact, a certainty, a done deal. She set the cup down in front of him, careful not to let her fingers touch the edge of his hand. He noticed. Of course he noticed. His lips curved, not quite a smile, but close enough to make her heart stumble. "You're still here," he said. "I work here." "Not for long." She frowned. "Excuse me. You don't belong in a place like this. You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." He took a sip of the coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something unsettling about the way he watched her. Not threatening, exactly, but absolute. Like he had already seen every version of her future and chosen the one he liked best. "Why did you pay my debt?" she asked quietly. "Because you needed me to." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Amora's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to this. People didn't do things for her without expecting something in return. Kindness always had a price. Always. "What do you want from me?" Dante set the cup down slowly, deliberately. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady, unflinching. "Nothing you're not willing to give." That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. He stood then, pulling a few bills from his pocket and placing them on the counter. Far too much for a single cup of coffee. He turned to leave, then paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "Someone will come for you tomorrow night," he said. "Don't make them wait." And then he was gone again. Amora stood there, her pulse racing, her mind spinning. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to throw the money after him and tell him she didn't need his help. But she couldn't, because the truth was, she did need it. She needed it more than she'd ever needed anything in her life. The next night, a car arrived. Black, sleek, the kind that didn't belong in her neighborhood. It pulled up in front of her building just as the sun was setting, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. He was younger than Dante, but he carried himself with the same quiet authority, the same certainty. "Miss Amora," he said, opening the back door. "Mr. Rossi is waiting." She hesitated. Her feet refused to move. The man didn't push. He simply stood there, patient, as if he had all the time in the world. Amora thought about her mother, about the medication she could finally afford, about the rent that had been paid in full for the first time in years, about the weight that had been lifted from her shoulders, leaving her feeling strangely light and unmoored. She thought about running. But where would she go? She got into the car. The drive was long, silent. The city lights blurred past the window, turning the world outside into a smear of gold and shadow. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't think the man would tell her even if she did. They arrived at a house on the outskirts of the city. No, not a house. An estate. High walls. Iron gates. Security cameras that tracked their approach with mechanical precision. the kind of place that existed behind walls for a reason. The car stopped in front of the main entrance, and the man opened her door. "This way, miss." She followed him inside. The interior was exactly what she expected and nothing like it at the same time. Dark wood, marble floors, art on the walls that probably cost more than her mother's hospital bills. Everything was pristine, cold, beautiful in a way that felt untouchable. And then she saw him. Dante stood at the far end of the room, his back to her, looking out over a sprawling garden bathed in moonlight. He didn't turn when she entered. He didn't need to. "You came," he said. "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice." "Do I?" He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. There was something raw there, something almost vulnerable. It disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by the same calm certainty she was starting to recognize. "You're safe here," he said. "Safe from what?" "From everything." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But safety always came with chains. She'd learned that a long time ago. "Why am I here?" she asked. "Because you deserve more than cold fries in the corner of a dying diner." "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said again. And this time, she almost believed him. If this story has already found a place in your heart, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more stories that stay long after they end. Amora stood there, caught between wanting to run and wanting to stay, between fear and something else, something softer, something dangerous. Dante crossed the room slowly, stopping just in front of her, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of cologne, clean and dark, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, a thin white line that spoke of violence she didn't want to imagine. "You can leave if you want," he said quietly, "but you won't." "How do you know?" "Because you've been running your whole life, and you're tired." She was. God, she was so tired. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, someone was offering her a place to rest, even if that place came with bars she couldn't yet see. The house became her world. It happened slowly at first. A day, then 2, then a week. Dante told her it was temporary. He told her it was for her protection. He told her that the people she owed money to, the ones whose debt he'd paid, weren't the forgiving kind. That they'd come looking for her. That staying here, behind these walls, was the only way to keep her safe. She wanted to argue. She wanted to demand proof, to insist she could take care of herself. But the truth was, she'd never been able to take care of herself. Not really. She'd been drowning for years, and Dante had thrown her a rope, even if that rope felt more like a leash. The days blurred together. She had her own room, large, pristine, with a bed so soft it felt like sinking into clouds. There were clothes in the closet, all in her size, all expensive. There was food whenever she wanted it, prepared by a cook she never saw. There were books on the shelves, art on the walls, windows that overlooked gardens she wasn't allowed to walk through alone. She was a guest, a prisoner, both, neither. Dante came to see her every evening. Sometimes he stayed for hours, sitting across from her in the library, sipping whiskey while she drank tea. They didn't talk much. He wasn't a man who wasted words. But when he did speak, she listened. Because his voice had a way of filling the silence, of making her feel less alone even when he said nothing of substance. He asked her about her mother, about her jobs, about the life she'd left behind. She answered carefully, revealing only what felt safe. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply listened, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She asked him about himself once. "What do you do?" she said. "For work." He smiled, not warmly, but with a kind of grim amusement. "I solve problems." "What kind of problems?" "The kind people don't want solved." She didn't ask again, but she watched him. She couldn't help it, the way he moved through the house like he owned every inch of it, because he did. The way people spoke to him in hushed, reverent tones. The way men in dark suits came and went at all hours, their faces hard, their voices low. The way he commanded without raising his voice, without ever needing to. She began to understand what he was, and it terrified her, but it didn't make her want to leave. 2 weeks in, she tried to call her mother. The phone in her room didn't work. She checked the outlets, checked the line. Nothing. She found Dante in his office later that evening, sitting behind a massive desk, papers spread in front of him, a glass of amber liquid at his elbow. "The phone doesn't work," she said. He didn't look up. "I know." "Why?" "Because I disconnected it." Her hands clenched at her sides. "You had no right." "I had every right." "She's my mother. She'll be worried." "She won't." "How do you know?" He finally looked up, his gaze steady, unreadable. "Because I've been having someone check on her every day. She's fine. She's being cared for. Better than you could manage on your own." Amora's throat tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to throw something, to demand he let her go. But the words stuck in her chest, heavy and useless. "You can't keep me here," she said quietly. "I'm not keeping you. You're choosing to stay." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" She turned and left before he could see the tears. But he was right, and she hated him for it, because the truth was, she could have left. The doors weren't locked. The gates weren't impassable. She could have walked out at any time. But she didn't, because out there, she had nothing. No money, no safety, no one who cared whether she lived or died. In here, she had everything, even if everything felt like a cage. If you've ever felt torn between fear and love, you'll understand her. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. The days turned into weeks. The weeks began to feel like months. Amora stopped asking to leave. She stopped asking questions. She moved through the house like a ghost, quiet and watchful, learning its rhythms, its rules, its secrets. She learned that Dante didn't sleep much, that he often stayed awake until dawn, pacing the halls, his footsteps echoing through the silence. She learned that he took his coffee black and his whiskey neat. She learned that he read voraciously, philosophy, history, poetry, books stacked on every surface, dogged and annotated. She learned that he played the piano in the dead of night, his fingers moving over the keys with a precision that felt almost violent. She learned that he was lonely. It was a strange thing to realize. A man like him, powerful, feared, untouchable, should never be lonely. But he was. She could see it in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, in the way he lingered in doorways, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words, in the way he touched her sometimes, brief, fleeting, always careful, like he was afraid she might disappear. And slowly, against her will, against every instinct screaming at her to protect herself, Amora began to care. She didn't want to. God, she didn't want to. But caring wasn't something you could choose. It crept in quietly, without permission, and took root before you even realized it was there. She started noticing the small things. The way his shoulders tensed when he received Satan phone calls. The way his jaw tightened when his men delivered bad news. The way he closed his eyes when he thought no one was looking, as if the weight of his world had finally become too much. She started leaving books on his desk. Ones she thought he'd like. Ones that reminded her of him. Dark, complex, beautiful in a way that hurt. He never mentioned them, but they always disappeared. One night, she found him in the garden. It was late, past midnight. The moon was full, casting silver light over the hedges, the fountains, the stone paths that wound through the estate like veins. He was sitting on a bench beneath a tree, his head tilted back, his eyes closed. She almost turned around, almost left him alone. But she didn't. She walked toward him slowly, her footsteps soft on the gravel. He didn't open his eyes. But he spoke. "You should be asleep." "So should you." I don't sleep much. I noticed. He opened his eyes then, turning his head to look at her. There was something different in his gaze tonight. Something softer. Something that made her chest ache. Sit, he said. She did. They sat in silence for a long time. The night was cool, the air filled with the scent of jasmine and oath. Above them, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. Do you regret it? She asked finally. Bringing me hay? He was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. No, even though I hate you for it sometimes. Especially because of that. She looked at him, confused. He smiled, a real smile this time, small and sad and achingly human. Because it means you're still alive, he said. Still fighting. And that's all I ever wanted. Amora's breath caught, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one trapped behind these walls. There are moments in life when you realize that the person you thought you knew is someone else entirely. Not worse, not better, just different, more complicated, more human. Amora had one of those moments 3 weeks into her stay. She'd been wandering the house, something she did when the walls felt too close, when the silence became too heavy. She'd learned the layout by now. The library on the 2nd floor, the study where Dante spent most of his time, the kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and coffee, the hallways lined with portraits of people she didn't recognize, the painted eyes following her as she passed. She'd found a door she'd never noticed before. It was tucked away at the end of a corridor, half hidden behind a heavy curtain. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, wondering if she should. She opened it. Inside was a room unlike any other in the house. Small, cluttered, personal. The walls were covered in photographs, some framed, some tacked up haphazardly, edges curling. Children, a woman with kind eyes, a man who looked like Dante, only younger, softer, smiling in a way Dante never did. There was a bed in the corner, unmade, a toy car on the nightstand, a pair of small shoes by the door. Amora's chest tightened. This wasn't a guest room. This was a memory. You shouldn't be in hay. She spun around. Dante stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, something raw, something that looked like pain. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to. Get out. His voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. She moved past him, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. He didn't follow. He just stood there, staring into the room, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. She wanted to say something, to apologize again, to ask who the people in the photographs were. But she didn't, because some wounds weren't meant to be touched. That night, she didn't see him. He didn't come to the library, didn't appear at dinner, didn't play the piano in the dead of night. The house felt emptier without him, colder. She lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the look on his face, the pain, the anger, the grief. She wondered who he'd lost, and how. She wondered if he blamed himself. The next morning, she found him in the garden. He was standing by the fountain, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the water. He didn't acknowledge her when she approached, but he didn't tell her to leave, either. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He didn't respond. I shouldn't have gone in there. No, you shouldn't have. She bit her lip, unsure of what to say next. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. His name was Marco. Amora looked up. My brother, Dante continued, his voice low, distant. He was 8 years old. Bright. Too bright for this world. He wanted to be a doctor. He used to bandage his toys when he thought they were hurt. He paused, his jaw tightening. They took him to get to me, to send a message. They thought I'd back down. Thought I'd give them what they wanted. Did you? No. The word was flat, final. I found them, though. Every single one of them. And I made sure they understood what happens when you touch someone I love. Amora's breath caught. She wanted to ask what he'd done, but she wasn't sure she wanted to know. He died because of me, Dante said. Because I was too proud, too stubborn, too convinced I could protect everyone. You were just trying to survive. Survival isn't an excuse for failure. He turned to look at her then, and the rawness in his eyes nearly broke her. That's why I brought you here, he said. Because I can't lose anyone else. I won't. Amora didn't know what to say, so she did the only thing she could think of. She reached out and took his hand. He stiffened, but he didn't pull away. They stood there together, the morning sun warming their skin, the sound of the fountain filling the silence. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Amora understood. This wasn't about control. It wasn't about possession. It was about fear. He was afraid of losing her the same way he'd lost everyone else. And she realized, with a strange, aching certainty, that she was afraid of losing him, too. If your heart's racing too, take a breath. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more unforgettable love stories. The weeks continued to blur together. But something had shifted. The tension between them had softened. The distance had closed. Dante still kept his secrets. Still disappeared into his office for hours at a time, his voice low and dangerous as he spoke to men she never saw. Still wore the armor of a man who couldn't afford weakness. But with her, he let the armor slip. Just a little. He started talking to her more. About books he'd read. About places he'd been. About the life he'd lived before all of this. A life she couldn't quite imagine. A life that felt like a dream he'd woken from too soon. He told her about his mother, who'd died when he was young. About his father, who'd taught him that kindness was a weakness and love was a liability. About the world he'd grown up in, where loyalty was bought and trust was a currency no one could afford. He told her things he'd never told anyone else. And in return, she told him about her mother. About the hospital visits. About the guilt she carried for not being enough. About the fear that one day she'd wake up and her mother wouldn't recognize her at all. She told him about the diner. About the late nights and the cold fries and the way she'd learned to make herself invisible so no one would notice how tired she was. She told him things she'd never said out loud. And somehow, in the telling, the weight became lighter. They began spending more time together. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. He taught her how to play chess. She was terrible at it, but he didn't seem to mind. She taught him how to braid. He claimed it was useless, but he let her practice on his hair anyway, sitting perfectly still while her fingers worked through the dark strands. They read together in the library, sitting side by side, the silence between them comfortable now, familiar. They cooked together in the kitchen, late at night when the staff was gone. She burned everything. He found it endlessly amusing. And slowly, quietly, without either of them meaning to, the lines between captor and captive, between protector and protected, began to blur. Until one night, when she looked at him and realized she didn't see a prison anymore. She saw home. Love doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock on the door and ask for permission to enter. It slips in through the cracks, quiet and unnoticed, until one day you wake up and realize it's been there all along. Amora woke up one morning and realized she was in love with Dante. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. There were no fireworks, no violins, just the soft, undeniable truth settling into her chest like a stone dropped into still water. She was in love with him, and it terrified her, because love had never been kind to her. It had always been something that took more than it gave, something that left scars, something that demanded sacrifice. But this felt different. This felt like breathing. She didn't tell him. She couldn't, because she didn't know if he felt the same. Because she was afraid that if she said it out loud, it would ruin everything. Because she wasn't sure she could survive losing him after finally finding him. So she kept it to herself, held it close, let it grow in the silence. But Dante noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed the way she looked at him now, the way she smiled when he entered a room, the way she leaned toward him when they sat together, as if gravity had shifted and he was the only thing keeping her grounded. He noticed, and it scared him, because he felt it, too. He'd been falling for her since the moment he saw her in that diner, sitting alone in the corner, eating cold fries like it was the only meal she'd have that day. There was something about her, something fragile and fierce at the same time, that made him want to protect her, to keep her, to never let her go. But love was dangerous. He'd learned that lesson a long time ago. Love made you vulnerable. It gave people power over you. It turned you into something soft, something breakable. And Dante couldn't afford to break. So he kept his distance. Or tried to. He buried himself in work, in meetings, in the endless demands of a life he'd never wanted but couldn't escape. He told himself it was temporary, that once the threat passed, once she was safe, he'd let her go. But the lie was starting to wear thin. One evening, she found him in the library. He was sitting by the window, a book open in his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was just staring out at the garden, his expression distant. She sat down across from him. "You've been avoiding me," she said. He didn't deny it. "Why?" He closed the book slowly, setting it aside. When he looked at her, there was something in his eyes that made her heart ache. "Because it's easier." "Easier than what?" "Than admitting I don't want you to leave." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and raw. Amora's breath caught. "Then don't let me." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because you deserve better than this. Better than me." She leaned forward, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. "What if I don't want better? What if I just want you?" He stared at her, his jaw tight, his hands clenched in his lap. She could see the war happening inside him, the part that wanted to reach for her, and the part that was too afraid to try. Finally, he stood. "You should get some rest," he said quietly. And then he left. Amora sat there alone, her chest tight, her eyes burning. She wanted to be angry, wanted to scream at him for being a coward, for pushing her away when all she wanted was to pull him closer. But she couldn't, because she understood. Fear was a language they both spoke fluently. The days after that were strange. They moved around each other carefully, like two people walking on glass. They still talked, still spent time together, but there was a tension now, a weight that hadn't been there before. It was the weight of things unsaid, of feelings too big to name, of a future they both wanted but were too afraid to reach for. And then, one night, everything changed. It started with a phone call. Dante was in his office when it came. Amora was in the library, curled up on the couch with a book she wasn't really reading. She heard his voice through the walls, low, sharp, angry. Then silence. She set the book down and stood, her heart pounding. Something was wrong. She could feel it. She found him standing by his desk, his phone still in his hand, his face pale. "What happened?" she asked. He didn't answer. He just stayed at the wall, his jaw clenched, his breathing uneven. "Dante, talk to me." He finally looked at her, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. "They found you." Her stomach dropped. "Who?" "The men I paid your debt to. They know you're here. They are coming." Fear spiked through her, sharp and immediate. "When?" "Tonight." She took a step back, her mind racing. "What do we do?" "I'll handle it." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and gripped her shoulders, his hands firm but gentle. "You need to trust me," he said. "Can you do that?" She nodded, even though her hands were shaking. "Good." He let her go and turned toward the door, barking orders to the men who appeared in the hallway. Amora stood there, frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading since the day she arrived. The outside world had finally caught up to them, and she didn't know if either of them would survive it. Before we close this chapter, take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Every small gesture helps the next story find its way to you. Violence has a sound, a rhythm, a terrible, undeniable certainty. Amora heard it before she saw it. The crack of gunfire, the shatter of glass, the shouts of men whose voices carried the weight of death. The world outside the walls had come crashing in, and there was no stopping it now. Dante had locked her in a room on the second floor, a room with no windows, no way out except the door he'd sealed behind him. He'd promised her he'd come back. He'd looked her in the eyes and sworn it. But promises were fragile things, and she could hear them breaking all around her. She pressed her ear to the door, her hands trembling, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The sounds of the fight echoed through the house, footsteps pounding on marble, bodies hitting walls, the low, guttural shouts of men who had nothing left to lose. She wanted to scream, wanted to tear the door open and run to him, but she didn't, because he'd told her to stay, because he'd told her it was the only way. So she stayed, and she listened. The minutes stretched into hours, or maybe it was only seconds. Time had lost all meaning. All she knew was the sound of chaos and the silence between the noise, the terrible, suffocating silence that made her wonder if he was still alive. And then, finally, the house went quiet. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of aftermath. The kind that settles over a battlefield when the fighting is done and all that's left is the counting of the dead. Amora's heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed harder against the door, straining to hear something, anything, that would tell her he was okay. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming closer. She backed away from the door, her pulse racing. What if it wasn't him? What if they'd won? The lock clicked. The door swung open. Dante stood in the doorway, blood on his shirt, a cut above his eye, his hands still trembling from whatever violence they'd just committed. But he was alive. He was standing. He was here. Amora didn't think. She just moved. She threw herself at him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face buried in his chest. He stiffened for a moment, surprised. Then his arms came around her, holding her tight, holding her like he'd never let go. I thought, her voice broke. I thought you were. I'm here, he said quietly. I'm here. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her hands framing his face. There was blood on his jaw, not his, she realized. Someone else's. Are they gone? Yes. All of them. His eyes darkened. Yes. She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't want to know. She just held him, and he held her back. The house was a wreck. Broken glass littered the floors. Bullet holes marked the walls. Furniture overturned. Blood, so much blood, staining the marble in dark, spreading pools. Dante's men moved through the rooms, cleaning, repairing, removing the bodies. Amora didn't watch. She couldn't. Dante took her to his room, a place she'd never been before. It was sparse, dark. A bed, a dresser, a single window overlooking the garden. Nothing personal. Nothing that revealed who he was beneath the armor. He sat her on the edge of the bed and knelt in front of her, his hands resting on her knees. Are you hurt? He asked. She shook her head. Look at me. She did. Are you hurt? No. He let out a breath, his shoulders sagging. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked exhausted. Not just tired, hollowed out. Like the weight of everything he'd been carrying had finally become too much. She reached out and touched the cut above his eye. He winced. Let me clean it, she said. It's fine. It's not. He didn't argue. She found a first aid kit in the bathroom and returned with alcohol and gauze. She worked slowly, carefully, dabbing at the wound, wiping away the blood. He watched her the entire time, his dark eyes fixed on her face. Why do you do this? She asked quietly. Do what? Risk everything. Fight like this. Live like this. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, because it's the only life I know. You could leave. Start over. No, I couldn't. Why not? Because this is who I am, Amara. This is what I was born into. What I was made for. I can't walk away from it any more than I can walk away from my own shadow. She set the gauze aside, her hands resting on his shoulders. Then let me stay. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. You don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do. This life. He stopped, his jaw tightening. This life will destroy you. Maybe, or maybe it'll save me. How? Because for the first time in my life, I'm not alone. His breath hitched. He reached up, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. You should hate me, he said quietly, for taking you, for keeping you, for dragging you into this. I know. But you don't. No, I don't. Why? She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his. Because you saw me when no one else did. Because you gave me a reason to keep going when I had none. Because you're the first person who ever made me feel like I mattered. His eyes closed. His hand tightened on her face. You matter, he said, his voice rough. You matter more than anything. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. It was desperate, fierce, full of all the things they'd been too afraid to say. His hands tangled in her hair. Her fingers gripped his shirt. They pulled each other closer, like they could somehow merge into one person, one heartbeat, one breath. When they finally broke apart, they were both shaking. I can't lose you, he said. You won't. You don't know that. Then we'll fight like hell to make sure it doesn't happen. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked like hope. If your heart's racing too, take a breath. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more unforgettable love stories. They stayed in his room that night, not touching, just lying side by side on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to each other breathe. Somewhere in the house, his men were still cleaning, still erasing the evidence of what had happened, still making sure the outside world would never know. But in here, in this small, quiet space, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that they were alive, together, and for now, that was enough. There is a moment in every story when the protagonist must choose, not between good and evil, those lines are rarely that clear, but between two versions of themselves, two futures, two lives that can never coexist. Amara's moment came on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the attack. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window, warm and golden. Dante was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to her, his shoulders tense. You're leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. He turned to look at her, and the guilt in his eyes confirmed it. I have to meet with someone. It won't take long. When will you be back? Tonight. She sat up, pulling the sheets around her. Can I come with you? No. Why not? Because it's not safe. It's never safe. He stood, crossing to the dresser, pulling on a clean shirt. His movements were precise, controlled, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands moved just a little too quickly. Dante. He paused. What happens when the next threat comes? And the one after that? How long can we keep doing this? He didn't answer. I need to see my mother, she said quietly. His shoulders stiffened. I need to see her, Amora repeated. It's been over a month. She doesn't know where I am. She doesn't know if I'm alive. I told you, she's being cared for. That's not the same. He turned to face her, his expression hard. It's too dangerous. You just killed everyone who was after me. There are always more. Then there will always be more. That doesn't change the fact that I need to see her. They stared at each other, the space between them crackling with unspoken tension. Finally, Dante crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. If something happens to you because I let you leave these walls, I will never forgive myself. Do you understand that? Yes. And you still want to go? Yes. He closed his eyes, his jaw working. When he opened them again, there was resignation there, and something else, something that looked like fear. 1 hour, he said. That's all I can give you. 1 hour, with 2 of my men, and then you come back. Okay. Promise me. I promise. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. The drive to the hospital was strange. Amora sat in the back of the car, flanked by 2 of Dante's men, silent, watchful, their eyes constantly scanning the streets. She felt like a prisoner again. But this time, the bars were invisible. The hospital smelled the same. Antiseptic and sorrow. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she made her way down the corridor, her heart pounding with every step. Her mother's room was at the end of the hall. Amora pushed open the door and stopped. Her mother was sitting up in bed, awake, alert. She looked thinner than Amora remembered, paler, but her eyes were clear, sharp, and when she saw Amora, her face broke into a smile. "There you are," her mother said. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me." Amora's throat tightened. She crossed the room and sank into the chair beside the bed, taking her mother's hand. "Never," she whispered. They talked for an hour. About nothing. About everything. Her mother asked where she'd been. Amora lied. Said she'd gotten a new job. A better one. That she was finally making enough money to keep up with the bills. Her mother seemed to believe her. Or maybe she just wanted to. When the hour was up, one of Dante's men appeared in the doorway. A silent reminder. Amora squeezed her mother's hand one last time. "I have to go." "Will you come back soon?" "I'll try." "You're happy, aren't you?" her mother asked suddenly. Amora looked at her, surprised. "What?" "You look different. Lighter. Like you finally stopped carrying the world on your shoulders." Taze pricked Amora's eyes. She blinked them back. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I am." Her mother smiled. "Good. That's all I ever wanted for you." Amora left before she started crying. The ride back to the estate was quiet. She stared out the window, watching the city blur past, feeling the weight of 2 lives pressing down on her chest. The life she'd had, and the life she was living now. She couldn't have both. She'd known that for a while. But seeing her mother again had made it undeniable. She would have to choose. When she returned to the estate, Dante was waiting for her. He was standing in the foyer, his hands in his pockets, his expression guarded. "How was it?" he asked. "Hard." He nodded, like he'd expected that. She walked past him, heading toward the stairs. But his voice stopped her. "Amora." She turned. "If you want to leave," he said quietly, "I won't stop you." Her breath caught. "I mean it," he continued. "If you want to go back to your old life, back to your mother, back to the world you knew, I'll make sure you're safe. I'll make sure you have everything you need. But I won't keep you here if you don't want to stay." She stared at him, her heart aching. "What do you want?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, and the rawness in his eyes nearly broke her. "I want you to stay," he said, "but I want it to be your choice." Amora crossed the room slowly, stopping just in front of him. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I already made my choice," she said softly. "The moment I got in the car that first night. The moment I walked through these doors. The moment I realized I didn't want to leave." His hands came up to cover hers. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Even though this life will never be easy. Nothing in my life has ever been easy." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, his face buried in her hair. "I love you," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. But she did, and the word settled into her chest like a key turning in a lock. I love you, too, she whispered back. And for the first time since she could remember, Amara felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Love doesn't solve everything. It can't erase the past, can't undo the damage, can't make the world outside any less dangerous. But it can make you willing to fight for something, willing to endure, willing to believe that maybe, just maybe, there's a future worth reaching for. Amara learned that in the weeks that followed, life with Dante didn't get easier. If anything, it got harder, because now that she'd chosen to stay, now that she'd chosen him, she had to live with the consequences. The late-night phone calls that pulled him away, the meetings behind closed doors, the men who came and went with blood on their hands and shadows in their eyes, the constant, underlying threat that hung over everything like a storm that never quite broke. She learned to live with it, not because she wanted to, but because loving him meant accepting all of him. The violence, the darkness, the parts of him that would never be clean. She learned his world, the rules, the codes, the unspoken hierarchy of power and fear. She learned which questions to ask and which to leave alone. She learned how to read him, the tension in his shoulders when something went wrong, the way his jaw tightened before he gave an order, the silence that meant someone wouldn't be coming back. She learned to be strong in ways she never thought she could be. But she also learned that strength had a cost. It came in the form of sleepless nights, nightmares where she watched him die over and over again, anxiety that clawed at her chest every time he left the house, the constant, gnawing fear that one day he wouldn't come back. She learned what it meant to love someone who lived on the edge of a knife, and she learned that she was willing to pay that price. Dante, for his part, tried to shield her from the worst of it. He kept her away from the meetings, away from the men, away from the decisions that had to be made in rooms she would never see. But she knew anyway, because she could see it in his eyes, in the way he held her a little tighter at night, in the way he looked at her sometimes, like he was memorizing her face in case he never got to see it again. He was terrified of losing her, and she was terrified of losing him. So they held on, to each other, to the fragile, imperfect life they were building together. One evening, they were sitting in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Dante was reading, his back against a tree, his hand resting on Amara's knee. She was lying beside him, her head on his shoulder, her eyes closed. It was peaceful, almost normal. "Do you ever wish things were different?" she asked quietly. He looked down at her. "Different how?" "That you didn't have to live like this. That you could just be." He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Every day," he said finally. "Then why don't you leave?" "Because it's not that simple." "It could be." "No, it couldn't." She sat up, turning to face him. "Why not? You have money, power. You could go anywhere. Start over." "You think I haven't thought about that?" His voice was rough. "You think I haven't imagined what it would be like to wake up one day and not have blood on my hands?" "Then do it. Leave. We could leave together." He shook his head. "They would follow. They always follow. The people I've wronged. The people who want revenge. The people who see me as a threat. Leaving wouldn't change that." "So you're just going to keep living like this? Forever?" "Until I can't anymore." The words hung between them, heavy and final. Amara's chest tightened. "Don't say that." "It's the truth." "I don't care. Don't say it." He reached out and pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, his lips pressing against her forehead. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I'm sorry I can't give you the life you deserve." "You are the life I deserve." He pulled back, looking at her with something that might have been hope. "You really believe that?" "Yes." He kissed her then, soft, tender, full of all the things he couldn't say. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. But peace is a fragile thing, and it never lasts. The threat came a week later. Dante received a message. A single photograph slipped under the front gate in the dead of night. Amora didn't see it, but she saw his reaction when he opened it. The color drained from his face. His hands shook. His jaw clenched so tight she thought his teeth might crack. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at the photograph, his eyes dark and distant. "Dante, talk to me." He looked up, and the fear in his eyes made her blood run cold. "They know about you," he said quietly. "Who?" "Everyone." Her stomach dropped. "They know you're here. They know what you mean to me. And they are going to use you to get to me." "What do we do?" He crossed the room in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. "You need to leave. Now." "What?" "No." "Amora, listen to me. If you stay here, they will come for you. They will hurt you. And they will make me watch. I'm not leaving you." "You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do. Goddamn it, Amora." I said no. They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with fear and desperation. Finally, she reached up and took his face in her hands. "I'm not running," she said firmly. "Not from this. Not from you. We'll figure it out. Together." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. And I'm staying." He closed his eyes, his forehead pressing against hers. "You're going to get yourself killed. Then we'll die together." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You're insane." "Maybe. I love you." "I know." And somehow, despite everything, they found a way to smile. Before we close this chapter, take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Every small gesture helps the next story find its way to you. There are moments when you realize that everything you've built is about to come crashing down. When the walls you've erected, the defenses you've put in place, the illusions of safety you've clung to, all of it becomes meaningless in the face of something bigger, darker, more inevitable than you ever imagined. For Amora and Dante, that moment came 3 days after the photograph arrived. It started with silence, the kind of silence that feels wrong, that presses against your skin like a physical thing, that makes every sound, the tick of a clock, the creak of a floorboard, the whisper of breath, feel too loud. The estate was locked down, guards at every entrance, security cameras monitoring every inch of the property. Dante had called in every favor, every ally, every resource he had. He wasn't taking chances, but sometimes preparation isn't enough. The attack came at dawn, not with gunfire this time, not with violence, with something quieter, more insidious, a fire. It started in the east wing, creeping through the walls, hidden behind plaster and wood until it was too late to stop. By the time the alarms went off, smoke was already filling the corridors, thick and black and suffocating. Dante woke to the sound of shouting. Amora was already awake beside him, her eyes wide, her hand gripping his arm. "What's happening?" He was on his feet in seconds, pulling on clothes, his mind racing. "Stay here." "Like hell." "Amora." I said no. She was already moving, already following him out the door. They ran down the hallway together, the smoke growing thicker with every step. Dante's men were everywhere, shouting orders, trying to contain the blaze, trying to evacuate. But the fire was spreading too fast. "We need to get out," Dante said, grabbing her hand. "Now." They made it to the main staircase before they saw them. Men, at least a dozen, armed, waiting. Dante stopped, his body going rigid. Amora's heart lurched into her throat. The man at the front stepped forward. He was older, gray-haired, with eyes that held no warmth, no mercy. "Dante Rossi," he said, his voice carrying over the chaos. "We finally meet." Marchetti. The name was a curse on Dante's lips. The man, Marchetti, smiled. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long. I thought it was time we settled things." "Let her go. This is between you and me." "Oh, I don't think so." Marchetti's gaze slid to Amora, and something cold slithered down her spine. She's the reason you've become weak. Distracted. Human. Touch her and I'll burn your entire empire to the ground. You're welcome to try. The men raised their weapons. Dante moved faster than she thought possible. He pulled her behind him, his body a shield, his hand reaching for the gun at his waist. But he wasn't fast enough. The shot rang out. Sharp. Final. Dante staggered. Amora screamed. He didn't fall. Not yet. He stayed on his feet, one hand pressed to his side, blood seeping through his fingers. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, but his eyes were still burning. Run, he said to her. No. Amora, run. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. He pushed her toward the back hallway, toward the servants' entrance, toward the one route that might still be clear. She stumbled, her vision blurring with tears. Dante. Go. She ran. She hated herself for it, hated every step that carried her away from him. But she ran. Behind her, she heard more gunfire, more shouting, the roar of the flames growing louder. She burst through a door and found herself in the garden. The cool night air hit her like a slap, sharp and jarring. She didn't stop. She kept running, toward the edge of the property, toward the gate, toward anywhere that wasn't here. She made it to the wall before hands grabbed her. She screamed, thrashing, fighting with everything she had. But there were too many of them. A cloth pressed over her mouth. Something sweet and chemical filled her lungs. And then everything went dark. When Amora woke, she was in a room. Small, windowless, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Her hands were tied. Panic surged through her, sharp and immediate. She pulled against the ropes, but they held firm. The door opened. Marchetti stepped inside. Awake already, he said pleasantly. Good. I was starting to think we'd used too much. Where is he? Amora's voice was raw. Where's Dante? Alive, for now. If you hurt him. You what? Marchetti tilted his head. You're not in a position to make threats, my dear. What do you want? Justice. Balance. What I'm owed. You're insane. Perhaps. He pulled out a phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward her. It was a live feed. A room. Dante, blooded and bound to a chair. Barely conscious but alive. Amora's breath caught. He's been quite stubborn, Marchetti said. Won't tell us where his accounts are. Won't give us access to his network. Won't cooperate at all. Let him go. I will, as soon as he gives me what I want. He won't. No, probably not. Marchetti pocketed the phone. Which is where you come in. He leaned down, his face close to hers. You're going to convince him, or we'll kill you both. Amora's heart pounded. Her mind raced. And then, somewhere deep inside her, something shifted. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was angry. Do what you want to me, she said quietly. But he'll never give you what you're looking for, because he'd rather die than let you win. Marchetti's smile faded. Then you both will. He turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. Amora sat in the darkness, her heart thundering, her mind spinning. She had to find a way out. Had to get to Dante. Had to. The ropes around her wrists shifted. She froze. They were loose. Not much, but enough. Someone had tied them poorly. Or maybe, just maybe, someone had tied them poorly on purpose. She started working at the knots, her fingers clumsy and shaking. It took time. Too much time. But finally, the rope gave way. She was free. Now she just had to find him. Freedom, she learned, is not a destination. It's a fight, a series of choices, 1,000 small moments where you decide whether to give up or keep going. Amora chose to keep going. She moved through the building like a ghost, silent and determined. The place was a warehouse, old, crumbling, the kind of place where bad things happened and no one asked questions. She could hear voices in the distance. Footsteps. The low murmur of men who thought they'd already won. She found Dante in a room at the far end of the building. He was slumped in the chair, his head hanging forward, blood dripping from a cut on his temple. But his chest was rising and falling. He was alive. She crossed the room quickly, her hands shaking as she reached for the ropes binding him. "Dante," she whispered. "Dante, wake up." His eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he didn't seem to see her. Then recognition dawned, and something that might have been hope flickered in his gaze. "Amora." "I'm here. I'm getting you out." "You shouldn't have come." "Shut up." The ropes were tight, the knots complicated. She worked at them frantically, her fingers numb, her breath coming in short gasps. Finally, they gave way. Dante slumped forward. She caught him, her arms wrapping around him, holding him upright. "Can you walk?" "I can try." They stumbled toward the door together, his weight heavy against her, her legs trembling with the effort. They made it into the hallway before they heard voices approaching. Amora's heart stopped. Dante straightened, his jaw clenching. "Go. Not this again." "Amora. We're leaving together or not at all." He looked at her, and despite everything, the pain, the fear, the impossible situation they were in, he smiled. "You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met. Good thing you love me." "Yeah, good thing." They moved as fast as they could, ducking into shadows, avoiding the patrols, heading toward what she hoped was an exit. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Every sound felt like a gunshot. Every shadow felt like a threat. They burst through a door and found themselves in an alley. Rain was falling, cold and relentless, soaking them in seconds. Behind them, shouts, running footsteps. "There." Dante pointed toward a car at the end of the alley. One of his. The driver must have followed them. They ran. Amora didn't think about the pain in her legs or the burning in her lungs. She just ran. Dante beside her, his hand gripping hers, refusing to let go. They reached the car. The door flew open. Dante shoved her inside, then collapsed in after her. "Drive!" he shouted. The car lurched forward, tires screeching, the sound of gunfire erupting behind them. Amora ducked, her hands over her head, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. And then, somehow, they were away. Speeding through the streets, the warehouse growing smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. They were safe. For now. Dante leaned back against the seat, his eyes closed, his breathing labored. Amora reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "We made it," she whispered. He squeezed her hand. "We did." The weeks that followed were strange. Quiet. Almost surreal. Dante's people cleaned up the mess, dealt with Mochetti, made sure no one would come after them again, at least not for a while. The estate was repaired, the damage hidden, the scars covered over. But some scars couldn't be hidden. Dante recovered slowly. The bullet wound healed, leaving behind a mark just above his ribs. A reminder. He didn't talk about what happened during the hours they were separated. Amora didn't ask. She had her own nightmares to deal with, but they faced them together. They spent their days rebuilding, not just the house, but themselves, the trust, the fragile, imperfect peace they'd found. Amora started visiting her mother again. Dante made sure she had the best care money could buy, that she was comfortable, that she never had to worry about bills or medicine or anything else. Her mother's condition stabilized. She even had good days, days where she recognized Amora, where they could talk and laugh and remember what it felt like to be a family. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, life went on. One evening, Amora and Dante sat in the garden again, the same spot where they'd sat so many times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. "Do you ever regret it?" Dante asked. "Regret what?" "Choosing this. Choosing me." She looked at him, This man who had saved her and trapped her and loved her all at once. Never, she said. Even after everything. Especially after everything. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, his chin resting on top of her head. I don't deserve you, he murmured. Probably not. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind she didn't hear often enough. But you're stuck with me anyway, she continued. Good. They sat there as the sun disappeared below the horizon, as the stars began to emerge one by one, as the world around them grew quiet and still. And in that stillness, Amara realized something. This was happiness, not the kind found in fairy tales, not perfect or pure or untouched by darkness, but real, messy, hard one, the kind that only comes when you've fought for it, when you've bled for it, when you've chosen it over and over again, even when it would have been easier to walk away, the kind that stays. A year later, Amara stood in the same garden, looking out over the roses Dante had planted for her. They were blooming now, red and full and alive. Her mother was inside, sitting in the sunroom, reading. She was better. Not cured, there was no cure, but better, stable, happy. Dante was in his study, dealing with whatever needed dealing with. He still lived in that world, probably always would, but he came home to her, every night, without fail, and that was enough. She heard footsteps behind her, felt his arms wrap around her waist, felt his lips press against her temple. Hey, he said softly. Hey. What are you thinking about? How strange life is. How it takes you places you never expected to go. Regrets? Not a single one. He turned her around to face him, his hands framing her face, his dark eyes searching hers. I love you, he said. I know. Say it back. She smiled. I love you, too. He kissed her, slow, deep, full of promise, and somewhere above them, the sky stretched on forever, full of stars and possibility. The world was still dangerous. Life was still hard. There were still threats, still shadows, still battles to fight. But they weren't alone, and that made all the difference. If stories like this linger in your heart long after they end, don't leave just yet. Like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below, and let the next story find you when the night grows quiet again.